turn this on, is we are going to do zeros just like we were using completing the square. It's just that now the zeros we're going to get are going to be complex. So we're going to put together completing the square and then with what you did yesterday with complex roots, so which means we're going to end up taking the square root of a negative number. So to where on the quiz, when we did that, when we took the square root, it was always a positive number, or so far with what we've done with completing the square, it's always been a positive number of square root. Well, we're going to look at it using negative numbers. So here I've put back up here our steps for when we're going to complete the square. So we want to find the zeros. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to set it equal to 0, and I want the variable terms on the left side and the constants on the right. So we have x squared plus 10x equals negative 26. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I need to set it equal to 0 because we're finding the zeros. And I want the variables on the left side and constants on the right if I can do it that way. So now we're going to complete the square. So half of 10 is, and 5 squared is, okay, so we have x plus 5, that quantity squared. There's our binomial squared. When we square that, we get 25, so I have to add 25 to both sides. So the thing is then, when I add 25, I still have a negative number on the right-hand side. So what's going to happen now is when I do the square root to solve the equation, I'm going to end up with a complex number, an imaginary number, because I'm going to end up doing the square root of a negative 1. So we take the square root of both sides, doing the same thing we were just doing. Get x plus 5 equals plus or minus, and the square root of negative 1 is, it's not 1, it's I, okay, 1I. So then we subtract 5, we get x equals negative 5 plus or minus I. And we're always going to write it in that form. We're always going to put the I second. So let's do another one. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we want to set it equal to 0. So we have x squared plus 4x, and then we're going to move the constant to the other side, so we'll go ahead and subtract the 12 now. So we want to complete the square and factor. So what binomial do I get? Okay, x plus 2. When I square 2, I get 4, so I got to add 4 to both sides. So then on the right-hand side, I have negative 8. So once again, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So we get x plus 2 equals plus or minus. And what do we get when we simplify the square root of 8? Okay, you get what? Square root of 8 is 8i. Okay, 2 square roots of 2i, all right? So when we write that, we're going to put the I in between the 2 and the square root of 2. So we will say that it's 2i square roots of 2. Reason is we don't want to put the I at the end because it doesn't belong under the radical, and it'll look like it is under the radical. So we subtract 2, get x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2i square root of 2. So this is just the same completing the square process. We're just going to end up with a complex number when we're done. The last thing what we're doing for the last example for this lesson is really, really easy, but yet sometimes you will mix things up. Okay? When we get solutions, when we're doing, or when we're completing the square, we always get a plus or minus, right? Plus or minus square root of 5, plus or minus 3i, negative 2 plus or minus 3i, negative 2 plus or minus 2i squared root of 2, negative 5 plus or minus I. We always get a positive and a negative there. So the solutions like these two, negative 5 plus I squared root of 10 and negative 5 minus I squared root of 10, those are related. Those are called complex conjugates. Okay? Complex conjugates. And all it is that if we had the number a plus bi, then its conjugate would be a minus bi. So all that happens there is the imaginary part changes signs. Okay? The real part does not change signs. The imaginary part changes signs. And lots of times when we ask for this answer, that lots of you, or sometimes you guys will change both signs, okay, or just change the wrong one. But whenever you're looking at complex numbers, they always need to be written in this order, like a plus bi or a minus bi. In other words, the imaginary part has to come second, okay, or last. So make sure you always write the real part, then the imaginary part. So we want to find the complex conjugates here. So for the complex conjugate, what's the conjugate of 8 plus 5i? Okay? 8 minus 5i. We change the sign of the of the imaginary parts. Okay? So the imaginary part, 5, was positive, so now I make it negative. Okay? All right, Nolan, how about letter B? Negative 6i. So if I wrote it in a plus bi form, it would be 0 plus 6i, which is then 0 minus 6i would be the conjugate, or negative 6i. Right? We change the sign, so we make sure it's written in a plus bi form, and then we change the sign of the imaginary part. Okay? The coefficient of I changes signs.